From the Hype HQ studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Raj Nation, and I am the founder of Startup Hype Man. Fast-growing startups work with me because they want to become better storytellers. Whether that's for customers, investors, or a packed audience, they know that story is their ticket to stand out, stand apart, and change the game. And this podcast here is where I talk with entrepreneurs and leaders in the startup ecosystem, ranging from scale stage to early stage, as they share specific strategies that they have executed to stand out across three specific areas: sales, marketing, and people. Before we begin today's episode, remember you can head to startuphypeman.com and subscribe to the newsletter that doesn't suck. You'll get new podcast episodes and timely reads written by me, but also helpful articles from around the web and a notice of upcoming pitch competitions. All right, let's dive in and hear how today's guest is changing the game.
Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Chicago, Illinois, and currently residing in Chicago, Illinois, he is the co-founder and CEO of Science on Call. Please welcome Andy Frievogel.
Thank you.
That's the most tame response I've ever had.
I pondered all night about how's he going to do that like WWA intro with a last name that has 3 syllables. It's like the 2-syllable
How would I
names.
emphasize? Yeah.
Yeah, but you nailed it, and thank you. I can't tell you how happy I am to be doing this. It's I could start any number of ways, but since we met you in the throes of the pandemic, in the beginning, so much has changed about what we do, but a lot of it tracks with our studies with you. Like we've had the opportunity to have you there kind of all along the way. There, yeah. We came to you, you helped us with our pitch, and then you helped me again with the startup grind pitch as well. And that was a good experience for me. And then we had another one after that I didn't place, and it was a bummer, but I was constantly thinking about you the whole time, because the whole time I was like, man, I should have checked with Raj again before I did this last pitch. But we're learning.
Of course. Learning's part of the journey, and I appreciate that. So to give everyone a background, again, this is Andy Frievogel, co-founder and CEO of Science on Call. What is Science on Call? Where they are the system that keeps restaurants, independent restaurants, up and running. They are the peace of mind and the real people to call when your systems are down. So if you're a restaurateur, and guess what? You have like 8 different apps that you have to do delivery through, whether it's like Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates, and your menu looks like one thing on one app and it looks like a different thing on another, and then your internet goes down on your side. Who are you going to call? Well, you're not Ghostbusters. You call Science in this case. And again, Science is the engine that's keeping these restaurants up and running, especially during a time right now where they really need to be online with so many limitations on restaurants due to the pandemic. And they were founded in the throes of the pandemic last spring, Science was, and they have been able to quadruple their MRR over these last 10 months. Some of their notable customers who you may have heard of include Go Get 'em Tiger, the coffee chain on the West Coast, Revival Food Hall, Mirai's Sushi, Hackney's Chicago Bagel Authority. They have been the backbone behind a lot of these places that people love to go to make sure that you can still actually go to them. And our relationship started about a year ago when we worked on the Science pitch. What was really cool was being able to not only work on that, but then again, like you mentioned, you had that startup grind competition that you entered and you came out the winner, which to me, the coolest thing of that was an IT services company beat out all of like a bunch of tech companies, right? Traditional, tech startup companies, as you would say. And it all came down to just really having the right message. So today, what we're going to talk about is, I love this topic because it so often comes up as almost like an excuse for companies. And the topic today is pitching a market that, quote, doesn't have any budget. So, Andy, why is this on your mind and why is this important to you?
Well, the reason that this whole idea resonates with me is that, in our first company, Luisa and I set out specifically to find businesses that thought they did not have any budget for technology. And a part of this tracks with my background at Intelligentsia Coffee. The most exciting part about my job there, when I was IT director at Intelligentsia for close to 5 years, was the retail shops. Because, every 6 months you get the opportunity to open another shop or two. And the way that the technologies that drive retail move, it's like every 6 months you have new iterations of point of sale, guest engagement technologies, audio, video, anything that you see and feel and experience in a retail shop. You've got an opportunity to improve that every couple of months because that landscape has changed so quickly, especially since the advent of cloud-based point of sale. And so we so enjoyed going into, record stores, shoe stores, barber shops. Like, we liked being out on the street. We liked being in the places where real people do real work. And so we knew that there were lots of solutions. And some of this was based on my experience in Intelligentsia. Some of this was Luisa's experience. We knew there were lots of opportunities to connect them with technologies that would enable their business, empower them to make better decisions, reduce their spending in many instances, and then also kind of propel their sales. And, we saw places like small retailers, cafes, and restaurants. They had all been taken advantage of previously by like these older traditional IT companies who say like, oh, you need firewalls, you need servers, all kinds of big iron, And it was restaurants specifically that we saw were just getting jerked around the most. It was like legacy point of sales companies would tell them, say like, oh, you need all this stuff. And here are a bunch of bolt-on services that work with our product that you're not even going to use, but we're going to make you buy it anyway. And they would totally leave them out in the cold if a support need would arise like outside of banker's hours. If restaurant calls Friday night at 7 and says like, hey, credit cards aren't running. Most IT companies say, okay, we'll have a consultant out there Tuesday. They're going to charge you $225 an hour and we'll see what we can do. Well, the thing is, that's the big dance for a restaurant is Friday night. And they got to make that money on Friday night. They can't wait for credit cards to start processing again on Tuesday. So we saw all this pain with our first company. And we were doing this kind of boutique IT consultancy thing saying like, listen, you could sell so much more of your records, for example, if your customers could make a purchase through Instagram, but you don't have any online presence that would allow them to make a purchase. So we'd say like, if you select this service and you do this thing, it's going to cost you maybe $28 a month, but you're going to make this much more. The return on investment was always there. So we are always dealing with what I consider to be negative budgets. Like we'd come to places and say like, not only do we not want to spend money on IT, we need to spend less money in general, in order to be profitable, in order to succeed. And our experiences were like, you can do that by making micro investments in technology. You can check off all those boxes. You can increase your revenue. You can increase your efficiency. You can decrease, the amount of time the owner's spending on little issues and focus on bigger initiatives. And we just kept knocking these down. A really good experience was one of our first customers was Spice House, pretty well-known spice merchant. When we went into Spice House, we met with Tom Erd and Patty and, the owners, and they're like, all right, here's what we got. And they had pads of paper and calculators. And that was their point of sale system. And everything got manually written into a ledger, an old leather-bound ledger at the end of the night as far as what they sold. And we took them from pen and paper to cloud-based point of sale to, redundant Wi-Fi or redundant internet connections to keep all those systems up and running, and automations and we helped them build out a fulfillment center. And of course, the Erds sold it, and it was a huge success for them. It's what they were looking to do all along, but they never had the data to really fuel an acquisition by another company, because all they had was this leather-bound ledger, and so we found ourselves in the business modernization business, But it was so exciting. It was one of the early wins that we had. We really enjoyed, saying like, hey, you could spend almost next to nothing. And this is when we came into the organization. They thought, oh, we're going to have to hire a CEO. They're going to have to, we're going to have to give them equity and things like that. When we ultimately do the sale, it's going to cost a lot of money. We're like, no, it's going to cost you a tenth of what you think on an annualized basis. Like, you're not going to hire an executive. You're going to hire us, and you're just going to pay us a little month, every month. And, we got them through it. But that's how we found early on that businesses can think that they have no budget, and they can think that their goal is to reduce costs. But in fact, they can make small investments that leverage the right technologies and reduce their spending, but increase their profitability. And we've seen it 100 times. So.
We're going to dive a whole lot more into that, I should say, as this conversation progresses. But before we do, let's talk more about Andy, the person. And I want to learn more about you and your background, Andy. Before we hit record, we were talking about where you grew up, and you talked about, suburbs of Chicago. But you had this interesting moment where you moved to Florida halfway through high school. Now, I know if that were me, I would have been kicking and screaming along the way, yelling at my parents, how could you rip me away from my friends? And I'd probably be like, during the best years of my life, how could you pull me away from my friends, right? So I just would say kudos, I guess, for not just rebelling and refusing to go. But my question out of this is, what was that experience like, having to leave one friend group at a point at that point in life? Like, you've established who you're friends with, at least, up to your first, adolescence, and then having to start making new friends. And then how do you feel that has shaped the way you build relationships moving forward?
That's a great question. And I think it's responsible for much of who I am, that experience. So, I grew up in Hinsdale. It was kind of idyllic suburban upbringing. And then when I was about halfway through junior year, my father transferred himself from his law firm, had an office in Boca Raton, and said, and he was going for it. And I totally admire it to this day. I want to live that life. I want to be by a swimming pool some of the time. So we did it. And I was absolutely thrilled with the idea. And I had great close friendships, where I grew up, but I've always been so gregarious that I can fit in with any group, and I can talk with jocks and that we get each other. I'm never been really a sporty person, but I was really into music. I was really into countercultural stuff. I was the kid that found the Clash album at the library in 7th or 8th grade. And I would go to the library saying I was going to study, but I would just sit in the record listening room and listen to London Calling over and over. And then I found Sandinista, and I would just that's what I wanted my life to be. I'm like, whatever this record sounds like, that's what I want to create for myself. Just this kind of day glow, multicultural, but have a hard edge to it, consciousness. And so I always found it really easy to move between groups of friends, though, because, I was involved in Young Life in high school. That was a Christian group, very soft evangelical group, but it was fun. It was like community center, and you got to hang out with your friends, and they weren't preachy at all. And then, so I had my Young Life friends. I worked at the radio station in high school. And so I had my radio music nerd friends, and and then I was going to punk rock shows when I was a freshman in high school in downtown Chicago. And I was seeing bands like Articles of Faith and Effigies and Naked Ray Gun and stuff like that. It was so amazing. to be able to drift between those groups. So when we said we were going to Florida, I'm like, awesome, it's going to be warm out. Maybe I can learn to surf. Maybe I could learn to skateboard better. And maybe there'll be like some well-to-do, disaffected punk rock kids there too. And so I figured out, and I found them. I found all 4 of them at Boca Raton High School. I went to the public high school. There was some gentle pressure on me to go to a private school there because there was a concern about the educational disparities between the Florida public school system and Hinsdale Central, which is a great high school, which is where I went up here. But I'll tell you a little secret. If you are a C student at Hinsdale Central, you can go to a Florida public school and be valedictorian like overnight. I wasn't actually valedictorian, but it was really easy when I got there. Like I didn't have to study or anything. So there was plenty of time for punk rock and wishing I could learn to surf, which never happened, and hanging out at the mall in the parking lot with friends, like very, Kevin Smith movie kind of existence.
Very classic high school life.
Yeah, it was great. And so from there I graduated. I went to University of Florida because I was a Florida resident. So it was a lot easier to get in at that point. Mm-hmm. And it was super cheap. My tuition was like $600 a semester. It was amazing. And then I got involved in bands and stuff like that there. But to get back to your question, I learned at that time that you can spread yourself out a little bit. And if you're a good listener, you can fit in with a lot of people and you don't have to kowtow to, their worst elements. Like if you're with people that, have an objectionable political view, you don't have to say, yeah, that's great that you think that. Like, you can stand your ground and you can drift between people, but you always learn a lot. And you see that in restaurants every day. Restaurant owners and operators occupy the entire socio-political spectrum. If you didn't know it. And I would say they tend to skew more conservative in many cases. And I've had some amazing conversations, especially in the last year. I ran into one of the restaurant owners that we work with on couple early November, and he had on I voted sticker. I'm like, man, good for you. And he's like, you know what? I know that you and I are not voting for, probably going to vote for the same person. But I'll tell you this election, I think we are voting for the same person. Huh. And he said, some's got to change. And I said, that's so great that you share that because I know I probably hold some views that you find objectionable. And he said, Andy, that's okay. If we're talking, we can disagree on like 9 out of 10 issues, but we find that one issue and we can work on that together. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I totally agree. I am not a third way, purple, whatever person in the middle at all. But I agreed with him on that point. And we always have good conversations about that stuff. And I have a couple other owner operators that I work with who definitely reside on the opposite end of the spectrum from where I do, but we always find common ground. And usually it's like, can you get this kitchen printer to work because the chef is yelling at it? But that's okay.
Well, I think that's a good segue then into the main topic, because I think it is a lot about relationship building. So our topic today is, again, pitching a market that doesn't have any budget. And my first question here is, when you think about the restaurant industry, it is like, it is known, it is notorious for being a industry that has no budget, not only having no budget, but also the things they are paying for, they don't pay their bills on time, or they conveniently switch their credit cards so they don't pay so they don't have to pay the thing on time. So why was this the industry that science said we need to pursue this as a company? So
we got kind of sucked into restaurants. Luisa and I started with this kind of boutique. Our first company was this kind of boutique IT consultancy focused on small retailers. But with my Intelligentsia experience, we always knew that specialty coffee was going to be part of it, because Intelligentsia was like a finishing school for people who were going to go start their own companies. And we landed with the best one possible. Go get them, Tigers. We've grown along with them. It's been an amazing journey. But what we found is around 2017, 2018, restaurants kept getting referred to us because there's the options available to them for IT support and IT strategy were so bad. It was either like these third-party IT companies that just don't understand restaurants, or it was hire someone internally. And when you hire someone internally, you're looking at salaries, benefits, everything. It gets you to 100K really quickly. For a small restaurant group, it's not sustainable even. And so they kept getting referred to us. Like the Apple business team kept calling and saying, like, hey, we got a restaurant here looking for a point of sale system. Can you guys help them? Because like nobody understood restaurants. And we're like, yeah, we can help. And so we started to build a little bit of a reputation. And then in 2018, we were busy enough that I finally had to convince Louisa to quit some of her side hustles. I'm like, I need your help. We need to focus on this full time. And so I said, I'll figure out a way to pay you a full-time salary if you can just come on and dedicate, because we're getting busy because these restaurants are finding us. And it was like a month after we made that decision, that sacrifice, and I'll constantly go back to that term, we landed our first big hospitality group. And what we found is, yeah, there was a lot of consciousness about price, and we had experienced that with other restaurant owners. But I'm going to challenge you on some of this. First of all, if they didn't all realize it in 2018, by the time 2020 rolled around, restaurants realized they absolutely depend on technology to survive.
Yeah.
It used to be a choice. You can't do it anymore without technology. And I'm also going to challenge you on who keeps telling you that restaurants don't pay their bills on time, because I don't have that experience. And I've had, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm lucky, but 3 or 4 times in my life, I've run into peers, investors, whoever in the industry, and say like, hey, we're working with so-and-so now. And it doesn't matter who it is, restaurant or not, real estate developer or not. I've had a bunch of careers. They always roll their eyes. They're like, oh, that guy, good luck getting paid, or good luck working with that person. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We get along famously. They pay their bills right away. And I guess I always have different experience than other people, but I think it's about articulating expectations, but also understanding who they are and understanding what the cadence has to be for that to work. Because yeah, restaurants are strapped, like it's all the problems that we fix every day have nothing to do with the pandemic. These problems have existed for 30, 40, 50 years in restaurants. As consumers, we don't pay enough when we dine out. Tipping is really challenging, and it's something that nobody has effectively addressed yet, whether or not it needs to be or not. Healthcare in this country makes it very difficult for a restaurant owner to employ people at a wage that still allows them to make any money, and then compete with the idea that if this server or if this barback gets sick, they're not going to be able to work for me. And so I'm just going to pull in another person. And then that person's like restaurant jobs, the churn is just amazing. Like it's mind boggling. People work at restaurants for 2 and 3 months sometimes. But if we could fix
less
the
than
healthcare,
that, right? Sometimes it's 2 and 3 weeks.
Yeah. Oh yeah, all the time. If we could fix the healthcare issues in this country, it would solve a lot, because people wouldn't have to go job surfing, just see like, oh man, this isn't working. I got to go find some place where I can get benefits. Because people who are in restaurants, they love to be there. They love the vibe. They love the camaraderie. People that they work 70, 80 hours a week some of the time, and they love it. There's this whole concept of the shifty, which is like you can get a drink at the end of your shift or a meal at the end of your shift. You go into a lot of restaurants, and depending where it is in the day, you'll notice there are people at the bar that are employees, but they decide to hang out for a drink. They decide to hang out and talk to their friends. They love to be there. Like you and I, like we've probably had office jobs in the past where like 5 o'clock, I'm punching out. I'm getting out of here. Restaurant employees don't do that.
Right.
But restaurant owners and operators, despite all of these pressures, I find them to approach their finances very responsibly, and they honor their commitments all the time. And I can only think of one restaurant that we've worked with since we launched Science on Call that I had trouble collecting money from.
Well, I think so. There's a couple of things that I think are worth pointing out here. One is, I think first off, just having the mindset that they are going to perform in the way you need them to perform is a good starting point, as opposed to assuming they are going to screw you over is probably a bad starting point. Now that said, you do want to like accommodate, or you do want to prepare for the scenario, or you want to make sure you are going to get paid. And I think a lot of this starts to speak to your business model and how you're able to figure out a price point, and then also a price point, a service point, and a payment structure in which you don't get ignored. And I think it's a combination of those things, plus the value of the product and service being provided means you don't get ignored in that sense either, where it's like, why are we paying for this? Or, let's skip that bill. We'll pay that next month, because you're not just like you're not just like a widget sitting on top of their counter that they don't have any sort of like connection to.
Yeah. So we are the human element in all of this technology. And yet we're a tech-enabled services company that our capabilities stretch beyond the 6+ living, breathing human beings that do the work. And so trying to focus and give you response to something that you just brought up. So here's what happens. Restaurants right now, in order to succeed, they need a good point of sale system, and they need a way for customers to order if they are not walking into the restaurant. So that could be any of the third-party delivery and ordering platforms. They could integrate with the point of sale, but there could be an aggregator in the middle, like a Chowly or Otter or somebody like that, that funnel in all those third-party orders and inject them directly into the point of sale if the customer is not using the built-in integrations. Well, here's the thing. So Toast, for example, Toast is right now, they're hands down the leader as far as cloud-based restaurant point of sale systems. They delivered all the functionality and features that restaurants needed to cope with the pandemic. But honestly, those consumer behaviors aren't going to go away, just because everybody's, vaccinated or whatever. And so there's still going to be a lot of ordering, and taking those orders on the phone is not scalable. So taking those orders through these third-party platforms, regardless of the fees you pay, that's a little more scalable. So restaurants can harness that. Here's the thing. Toast used to have a field team of about 1,000 field implementation specialists. All right. In April of 2020, they cut that. So right after we launched Science on Call, all of a sudden, we started getting lots of inbound requests from Toast sales reps saying like, hey, there's a bar and grill up the street that they would like to sign up with Toast. We don't have a field engineer we can send to there to look and check out the network and make sure that it will support our system. So I said, I'll go. So we'd go there, meet with it. We'd identify 100 IT issues that Toast wasn't going to resolve, or any point of sale wasn't going to resolve, because they were unrelated to point of sale. You're like, oh yeah, also internet goes down all the time. Also, guests are complaining about guest Wi-Fi. Also, the music cuts out at night, whatever. We're like, you need a partner to help you, corral all this into one place. And, Toast is a great system, for example, but they're going to support Toast. They're going to do it for free, but they're just going to support Toast. When you call and say, hey, kitchen printer isn't working, I think it's because my internet's down, Toast's going to tell you to call Comcast or AT&T or whatever. So we became the face of these deals. We're like, Toast rep needs to know if this deal is going to work. We go on site, meet with the owner operator and say, oh yeah, we can totally figure out a way to reconfigure your network so it'll support this. And so they'd say like, and you can solve all these other problems for you, you're hired. And I mean, like, I close deals in a first meeting in a half an hour, a lot.
Okay, and so let's talk through that part now, right? Yeah. So, and I think that's a very interesting point you just made. You can close deals often, you're closing them in a 30-minute meeting. So you're not setting up the meeting to get to another meeting. You're not dragging out the process, which some cases that's required, not dragging out, but the process needs to be longer. Other cases you can get the quick, the one meeting or the one call close, if you will, which is great.
Yep. Can
you walk us through what's happening in that meeting then? Is it literally you were sent to diagnose something and then you're like, well, we can do all this other stuff? Or like, what does that conversation look like in those 30 minutes?
So it is a lot of that. It's like they show up and all they think is like, I'm like a wiring guy or an IT guy who's going to look and like check off boxes on the point of sale system site readiness survey, which they need turned in before they'll agree to send out gear and stuff. But I show up, and honestly, I have fought the battles that they are dealing with. I have my team and I shouldn't even say I, Ken, our CTO, and Louisa, our COO, who the three of us, and then our tech Evan, and a couple other people. We fought these battles so many times that I walk into a restaurant and I'm like, boom, boom, boom. You're unhappy about these things before you even tell me, because I know how they work and I've seen it in other restaurants, and we're the antidote. We're the ones that are going to be accountable for getting all this fixed. Right. And so it's really quick, and it's just parlaying the experience we've had with every other hospitality and restaurant customer, identifying the problems quickly and knowing confidently that we're the ones that can solve them, and we're the only ones that are interested in solving them. And so those meetings go really fast. And I've started invoicing people when I get home from the meeting, even before we had a contract in place. Because I'm like, we're hitting the ground running. We're going to fix your problems. By this weekend, you're going to feel better about your restaurant.
Now, that seems to be a case where it was like, it started with an inbound lead, right? Like they inquired on the website, or maybe Toast needed to send you out there. Now, what about the opposite case where it's not an inbound lead and you've had to get the meeting with that, or perhaps you're not doing any outbound right now, you're just taking all the inbound leads. Can you talk through what that process looks like, where they haven't invited you in, quote unquote, as the premise of the meeting?
Yeah. So that is new to us because we didn't need to do it at all, but we can and want to grow. We're operating so far beneath our capacity right now. We're supporting, the number grows literally every day, but right now we're at 63 or 65 active restaurant customers that are open and need us. Our unit economics are really good. Our average customer requires less than 2 hours of our attention every month. And so with the team that we have in place, we can likely support between 250 and 300 restaurant customers, and they all pay a flat fee, $179 a month. And we can grow, and we've got runway through halfway through 2022. The only reason we're considering our next raise is because we kind of want to pour some fuel on the fire. We want to ramp up our outbound sales efforts. Right now, those outbound sales efforts consist of, Ken Sang is our CTO, but he can close deals too. People talk to him, they're like, I want that guy, or I want that guy's team, But also, he has a lot of respect from his background as a thinker in IT and in both the supermarket space and also the restaurant space. He's the ultimate foodie. He can cook anything. He's always feeding us into our channels. We don't use Slack. We use Click now, which is just like Slack, but it's by Zoho. It's pretty neat. We've got this one channel that Ken's just constantly filling up with saw these guys on Eater, somebody go get them, or saw this Instagram post by so-and-so, Andy, go after it. And so, and he does that, Louisa does that, Evan does it. So it's usually myself, or we have a sales rep out in Los Angeles, Katie, where if we get one of those, we'll run with it and we'll see what we can do to make forays into an introduction. And that includes, like Cheryl Kemp mentioned, sliding into DMs, hey, I saw you posted that you're closed today because your point of sale is down. We can fix that. We can probably fix it quickly. That's a return on investment of $2,000 for a lot of small restaurants.
Right.
All they have to do is return the call, or all they have to do is respond to our message. We get those issues fixed. But a lot of what Katie and I do are sifting through these leads that we get from the rest of our team. We get a lot of referrals from other restaurant owners, but now we're on the outbound effort. We're looking at lists. So we're looking at Eater, 9 new restaurant openings on the west side of LA that you need to know about. Well, all that goes into our CRM, and they enter in as qualified leads. The reason being is when we started this, we only solved about 70% of issues remotely, which meant we had to have boots on the ground to really effectively support a restaurant. The last 3 months, we are at 96, 98, and 98% remote resolution, which means we can deliver value to anybody. So if you're a restaurant with like it's like if you're a restaurant with a door that opens, you're probably a good customer for us. Yeah.
I like
In
that
fact,
qualification.
We've got restaurants that don't have doors that opens. They converted into some little drive-through window.
I was going to say, does that exclude the revolving door restaurant?
It does not. It doesn't. If you're a restaurant with a beating heart inside somewhere,
with a way to enter your building, isn't there?
Yeah. So at that point, you're qualified. So then what we have to do is we have to move them to the awareness phase. We have to spark some interaction with those customers, and that's really hard, especially with no concerted outbound marketing, effort today. We got so fat on inbound referrals that we've taken our time in ramping up our real go-to-market strategy.
Sure.
And so, but then if we can create awareness, then we like race right down the funnel towards consideration, intent, evaluation. And I would say if we can get somebody to consideration, I feel like we close 30% of those. It's just a matter of getting our name out there, getting them to understand who they are, because a lot of people don't believe us when they hear what we can do for them. Like, that's crazy. You're going to do this for $179 a month? Like, yeah, absolutely. Because you're a restaurant. We know what your budget is. You cannot afford for, some third-party IT consultant to say, yeah, I'll be there Tuesday to fix your credit card problem, and they're going to charge you $750. You're going to lose $3,000 or $4,000 or $8,000 in the meantime in lost sales because you can process credit cards. We're the antidote to all of that, and it's because we realize you don't need to make a ton of money on a little job for a restaurant, because you can become their team forever. You can integrate into their culture forever. You can know the cooks' names, the dishwashers' names. You can be friends with them. And that only costs them $179 a month. And they're going to stick by you forever. Our retention rate is like 98%.
Yeah. Well, and I want to ask about that next. But before I do, let's take a quick step back for a moment. And feature, as we were doing all this season, we're featuring different elevator pitches from companies that have worked with Startup Hype Man, using the Startup Hype Man KPASA elevator pitch formula, which stands for problem, approach, solution, action. Today, we are featuring Engagedly, the HR tech company. And if you're not familiar with Engagedly, essentially, here's how it plays out for them. If you're an HR leader, there's a good chance you are buried in spreadsheets and paper documents to track goals, OKRs, and engagement. And that's creating a trickle-down effect of missteps in the process, chasing down managers for approval, and reviews just being subjective. Pre-pandemic environment, partially tolerable. Remote work environment, damn near impossible. And as things move towards a hybrid environment over the next, I'd say, 6 months to a year, it's not sustainable. Engagedly helps HR leaders streamline and control their processes regardless of the physical environment. So companies are using Engagedly to have company-wide people enablement. And this means all of performance management lives on one platform, no missteps, no hunting down managers, no gaps in the process. HR leaders love it because they aren't buried anymore, but more importantly, at an organizational level, performance becomes something that happens for team members instead of happening to them. Now you can learn all about Engagedly and get a demo at www.engagedly.com. Again, for company-wide people enablement, you go to www.engagedly.com, learn more, and request a demo. Today, I am with Andy Frievogel, the co-founder and CEO of Science on Call, and we are talking through pitching a market that, quote, doesn't have any budget. Now, Andy, before the break there, I mentioned, or you had mentioned how your retention is like 98%. And one of my questions on that note is actually, as we've seen in the news, restaurants are closing at a startling rate due to the pandemic. are you losing customers just simply off the fact that the customers disappear? Not because of bad service, but literally because they just go out of business.
So we tend to look at our, the metric we like is the number of locations that we support. So we've got customers with 10 locations, customers at 30. So we've lost 2 locations since the pandemic. Because you got to remember, like, Luis and I operated a different company till the end of 2019. Then we joined the Food Foundry Accelerator program through RelishWorks. They turned us in. They helped turn us into what we are. Like they sent us to business school, and we totally reformulated the way we approached it, focused on restaurants completely. Yes, we are the company that said, here's an idea in the beginning of 2020, let's focus entirely on restaurants. And then, some people would say that maybe that was could have been short-sighted, but we didn't know enough about the pandemic then to see what was going to happen. But since we launched Science on Call in the beginning of 2020, we had 1 location. It was a standalone restaurant or cafe. They already knew they were going out of business. He was looking for a buyer anyway. So the pandemic just kind of sealed the deal for him. It's like, I'm closing. And then the other was another victim of the pandemic, except they're a really strong, solid business. They were doing great. Their landlord freaked out and they were on a sublease from a company that had pulled out of that property. And so when the company, they either dissolved or something, it basically evaporated the lease. And the landlord's like, you need a new lease. I will charge you triple in rent what you were paying previously. And they're like, you know what? We're already opening another store up the street. So it's literally at night. They drove up, they unloaded, an espresso machine, all their network gear, a lot of furniture, and they just took it to the new location. They had that other location open like weeks after that. And that's another thing. It's like customers that work with us already recognize the need for technology. So they have an edge on some of the restaurants that have not made it during the pandemic. It's like those who were unable to adopt to the kind of new way of restauranting, we're already in a little bit of trouble for that reason. The customers that are working with us are customers that had already acknowledged the need for some kind of technology to run their business. And the reason they're selecting us is because they knew it was more cost effective and more effective in general if they put it in the hands of an expert team.
Well, yeah, I think the main shifts we've seen are essentially the new standards, if you will, and the changes in behavior. It's like you have to offer delivery, you have to offer online ordering, and I think the consumer shift is, I would say, it was starting to go that way, but then it just got pushed, 100x.
Yeah,
was even if you take it as recently as like 3 years ago, the most common way someone would look up a restaurant was a Google search. Yeah. And I think now the most common way is going through a third-party app like a DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats, or Grubhub.
Yep.
And so it's almost like the market's forced them to act in that way or just get left behind. And those who didn't are getting left behind or having these extenuated circumstances. I feel like in the response you gave there about like, hey, like here's why a couple companies have churned due to things beyond their control. The way you gave that response, I think, speaks again to what I talked about in the beginning, and what I recognized was the idea of like, what's your psyche or your mindset, where you're not thinking on one hand, you're not going into this being like, well, I'm talking to people who don't have budget, but then just now, what I'm also gathering is you're going into this being like, I'm not working with companies that are going out of business. You're not going in with that presumption, I guess.
Well, we don't worry about that. I don't look around the restaurant and ask myself, are these guys in trouble? Like, is this going to be a good customer for us? I don't worry about that. I wouldn't even worry about a little bit of churn, honestly. If we don't have a little bit, it probably means we're not trying, we're not experimenting enough, But I would say this is that a lot of the people that work with us are a lot of the restaurant owners, operators, a lot of them are young and they're very tech savvy. They could do some of this stuff on their own. They could maybe do all of it. But what they find is when they've got us in their corner, we're like a safety net for them. They're like, oh, if I've got these guys to deal with like 86 items from all the platforms because we ran out of them, or if I've got these guys to deal with tweaking a menu because it doesn't show up right, or, this, Chicago-based order aggregation platform never picks up the phone and never responds to my requests, but I know Science gets me results somehow. If they know that we can do all that for them, then they can say things like, I think I'll open a shop in Brooklyn, or they say, I'm going to launch a new product, because now all of a sudden we've freed them up to continue to innovate and continue to focus on those bigger initiatives. And so despite the fact, I would maintain that the total addressable market for Science is also entirely obtainable. It's like there's no restaurant that can't benefit from working with us now that we're solving 98% of issues remotely anyhow.
Yeah.
But there definitely is a subset that's an easier close because they are young hustlers who understand technology, but they could be doing a lot more if we could be taking some of the hits, from their team. And so yeah, we're not pre-selecting people based on whether or not we think they're going to succeed. We're selecting restaurants because we see the opportunity to help them. We see the opportunity to make them better. And we see the opportunity to relieve their pain. Like February 2021 was the worst month for most restaurant owners. And a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, oh, but we're all getting all this PPP and we're getting all this. Like, no, the requirements of PPP for a restaurant are really, really like a pile of paperwork, for a lot of them. And there were a lot of restaurants that had figured out a way to make it all the way to February of this year. But then February, there was so much nervousness, anxiety, uncertainty that they were like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. But the ones that worked with us did.
Let's begin our wrap up based off of that. First question here is, where can our listeners find you? Where can they find Science, and where can they learn more?
Yeah, scienceoncall.com is the place to go. What we do is really simple. It doesn't take a lot to understand how we can benefit, a restaurant. And so just check out our website, or you can text us too. We do a lot of our support for restaurants via SMS. And so I'd always say, just text us 312-521-0016. Nice.
Andy, who's one person that you want to shout out? This could be a team member, an advisor, a customer, anybody.
I would absolutely say my wife. And, she was the first entrepreneur in our household. She's an artist. She had an artist background, but she grinded her way through, office jobs. I followed her into technology. I was like a second wave coffee shop manager in the 90s. And my wife worked for a technology company first. So I followed her into that. And so she's the person that she gives me the confidence that I have. She pushed me early on. She's like, you got to learn to stand up for yourself, do this. Those are skills I hadn't developed completely until I met my wife and we got married. But also she was the first one to strike out on her own, start a business in our household. She has a booming business as an artist, and she's been just as affected by this as a lot of restaurants. She sells to retailers and museum shops, but she effected a very quick pivot. She was making masks for a little bit. She amped up her direct to consumer channels, for her products and things like that. She hit all these challenges with just great aplomb. It was really amazing. But I've been seeing that. I've been witnessing that for close to 30 years at this point. So, but that's the person that inspires me every day, and inspired me to strike out on my own and do my own thing. And that's how I met Louisa. And that's how Louisa and I ended up co-founding Science on Call. So
let's do our top one or two lessons or takeaways now, based on our discussion today. I'll go first, then I'll toss it to you. Again, the topic today was pitching a market that traditionally, quote, doesn't have any budget, end quote. For me, I think it's I kind of see like two like independent things here. One of them is what I gathered here is how key empathy is in this process and really like just being able to relate to the customer. And the other one, I'll put like that in like one bucket. And the other bucket, I think, is if you're going to succeed in a market that, public perception is not, doesn't have any budget again, you have got to you gotta have a product / service with a price point and a business model that greatly favors them. And if it greatly favors them, then you have a chance of succeeding as a company. But if you build it from the start of how does it favor us, chances are maybe you'll get some early sales, but you'll fizzle out pretty quickly. And I think in your case, having a low subscription cost to IT services allows you to have a low margin on a single like deal, but your customer lifetime value, like you don't churn. So you make back, your profit over several months on a single customer, and you just have a high volume of customers by being able to service most of your stuff remotely.
Right.
Andy, top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways?
I got to respond to it. Our LTV to CAC was traditionally like 13-1, and people keep saying like, oh, well, if you were a SaaS company, you could get away with like a 3-1 ratio. It's like, we're trying to shrink it, but our lifetime value for our customers has just been like, feels like infinity at some point, and our cost of acquisition is a lot lower. But anyhow, as far as the 2 takeaways, these are things I would tell anybody about any business, but specifically about restaurants, regardless of the pandemic or not. Just they're an underappreciated industry. And so these are the 2 things you need to know is if you lead with empathy and with heart, there is a market waiting for you. So whoever you are, find what your passion is. And I don't mean like do what you love, because that doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't pay the bills for a lot of people. But the thing that you keep thinking about, the thing that you keep waking up wanting to do, if you want to be around that all the time, like Louisa, Ken, and I want to be around restaurants all the time, that's what we love. If you want to be around that thing all the time, I promise you there's a problem that you can solve there, and there's a meaningful business anytime you can find a way to solve a problem for an industry like that. So that's one. Empathy will drive you to the right corners to find the opportunity to not only make money, but to really provide meaningful services and meaningful change to an industry. And that's what we're doing. The other thing I would say, and it just keeps proving itself time and time again for our organization, our first company and then now Science on Call, which is if you work hard and your motives are true, there is absolutely no sacrifice that won't result in reward. I think I don't know how people do it in if this is what people are thinking in SaaS companies, but in a services company, you need to be thinking about what sacrifices can we make to move the ball, not just for ourselves, not just to extend our runway, but to improve operations for our customers. And sacrifice is always a good way to approach it. A lot of times it has no cost.
Perhaps that'll be how you answer the next question. I'm not sure if it will, but my final question, which is how we end every episode on this show, fill in the blank, Andy. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Sacrifice. It's sacrifice. I saw that coming, and I've been thinking about it, and that's always going to be my response. But sacrifice is good. Sacrifice isn't like, oh, woe's me, I don't have something I would like to have. Sacrifice is like, hey, here's a way to get from A to B. If I cast aside this, whatever this baggage is, or whatever this thing that I think is so dear, but maybe isn't, if I can just cast some things aside, the boat rises in the water, it moves faster. You can get there if you're just willing to make sacrifices. And the first sacrifice I'm always going to tell people is think about money. not profitability, but don't focus on short-term gains. Focus on producing good in the world. Focus on producing results for your customers. And I think that that's always going to be sacrifice is the way to do that.
Entrepreneurship is sacrifice. I'm a big fan of it, and I totally understand where you're coming from with that. He is Andy Frievogel. He is the co-founder and CEO of Science on Call. Andy, thank you so much for joining today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast.
Thank you. Totally inspired by what you do. Totally blessed to have been with you today. Thank you so much.
That wraps up today's conversation. Did you like what you heard? Startup Hype Man, the podcast, is available on every major platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and more. So be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and leave a rating and review. Do you want to be an upcoming guest on the show? Email media@startuphypeman.com with your idea, and my team will review. Our theme song is Change the Game by Jay-Z, all rights owned by Rockefeller and Def Jam Records. And hey, if you want to work together on making your startup story the only one that matters, email me at rajiv@startuphypeman.com. That's RAJIV@startuphypeman.com. Well, that'll do it for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to today's guests for joining. You have been checking out Startup Hype Man, the podcast. I'll catch you next week. But in the meantime, word up, raise up.